Holly Higgins, it is so great to see you here. Um, we will be talking about our new book, Wounds to Wisdom, Healing Through Veteran and First Responder Narratives today. And Holly Higgins is one of our beautiful authors on the book. Holly, it's just such a pleasure to have you. You have put heart and soul into sharing your story. Not only that, but living your story. And you have been a healing voice, an inspiration to so many of us. So I want to welcome you to this conversation. So
Thank you,
listen,
Sarah.
oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank you. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. We're laughing because you know what? We know each other so well that it is just it's so fun to be able to have this conversation today. And this is what it's about. It's a relaxed conversation. It is having our authors on to share with anybody out there that is listening. If you are suffering in silence, we want you to hear these stories to know that there is hope. And that is what Holly brings. So, Holly, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? And what kind of led you to a life of military connection?
From several places, I guess. Most recently, I'm living in Wisconsin, a little north of Madison, Wisconsin. Had my children up in northern Minnesota and lived there for many years while they were little. Um, Came here to finish a graduate degree in social work. I was a nurse and a social worker, worked in the mental health field for over 25 years. And the military was not something I wanted initially to be a part of my life. And that's part of my story. My father served. I was the youngest of his children, and he served in World War II. And I was born more than a decade after that war. But he brought the war home to our home. And it was very tragic things that happened in my family growing up, but I didn't know how much it was connected to the war at the time. And when he finally wanted treatment, and he did, and it was wonderful. Sadly, he only had a couple of years left of his because of the damage of the addiction. And so he lived a short time in that really healthy place of sobriety. And in that place, he discovered storytelling with his relationships with Alcoholics Anonymous. And he did tell me one story before he died. And that one story was so powerful. It sadly did not bring healing for me. It hurt me terribly. But he needed to tell it. He needed to get that out. And in many ways, it has come full circle now. But at the time, it hurt me to the point where I determined that the United States military was at fault for all the damage and all the pain that my family suffered.
Okay. Yeah.
It was one combat story. And I determined no more. I would not trust that organization. But then my 18-year-old son, after 1 year of college, decided that he was going to enlist in the United States Air Force. And that's what got me into it. It was somewhat kicking and screaming to begin with. I didn't want to support him. I stood my ground for a few months, not wanting to do it. But
Yeah.
I don't know how much you want me to tell you of my story here.
I do have to say, as another mother that has a son who's serving, I understand that first reaction. And I do want to share with the people who are listening to this right now. Holly Higgins is a Gold Star mom of Daniel J. Johnson, senior airman. And she's also a story coach, and she is a public speaker. So you know how this story is going to go. You imagining what she has had to face hearing the news that her son was killed in action in Afghanistan. Holly, tell us about that moment when you heard that Daniel was killed.
I have not shared that moment a lot, to be honest. It was a very, there aren't words. There's no word to describe that initial feeling, and what it was like. Sadly, a lot of, to quote another lieutenant colonel that I have met who's been involved in notifying families, he talks about the I's being dotted and the T's being crossed and all the bureaucracy to make sure that the families are notified in the way that it has been determined to be the best way possible. None of that happened for us. We were driving home on a long road trip. At the end, it was nighttime, it was dark, and it had been a beautiful day, a long day of driving through a beautiful Indian summer day from northern Minnesota down to Wisconsin. So we had our phones turned off to try and just disconnect from the technology and enjoy the beauty. But when we turned our phones back on, there was like 15 calls from one of my sons, and it was my oldest son who had just left his house that morning. He had just had his first daughter, so it was our first granddaughter. And so my immediate thought was, oh my goodness, something happened to the baby. And I called him, and he assured me that he was fine. And I knew that Danny's dad, whom I'm not married to anymore, was on his way to their house. I knew that. And it was odd because my son said, you need to call Dad right now. And I said, well, isn't he right there? And he said, he is. You need to call him right now. Mm-hmm. And so I called him, kind of, very naively thinking, well, maybe he just wants to, appreciate the joy of our first granddaughter with, talk to me on the phone about it, because we were still very close. So I called him, and he answered, but total silence. I could tell he answered the phone. And I said, Jim, what's up? And I could hear his voice shaking, and all he could get out was, in a very tight throat, was, we lost Danny. I don't remember, to tell you the truth, I don't remember a lot. I know my husband, I screamed. Apparently, it frightened my husband. He swerved. We almost lost 2 more lives that night because he swerved. We were on an interstate. I mean, this is not what the military wants to happen to families. He did pull over. I do remember running out into a field in the dark on this was isolated interstate on a cold October night then, and just kneeling in the mud. And my husband coming out and saying, what happened to you? And I remember saying it happened to all of us. And it was, when people talk about the knock at the door, I get jealous. I'm like, I wish I had gotten a knock at the door, and 2 beautiful, loving warriors would be standing there, or 3, a chaplain, for me to fall on my knees on the floor instead of in a lonely field in the middle of Wisconsin somewhere. We still had 3 hours left to drive home. And and what happened, by the way, to my brain, how my brain handled that, was then I went into the denial immediately and said, well, you know what? He said, we lost Danny. We lost him. He's lost. He's missing in action. And that's how we got home. I called everybody I could while my husband drove. And I said, Danny's lost. He's missing in action. Please pray. They'll find him. And that was the only way I could get through those miles. It was a tough, tough time.
Holly, it's unimaginable. It's just unimaginable what that moment was like and what your brain did to try to protect you. I mean, it's understandable. I'm so sorry that you didn't have that. The news was not given to you in that way, the way that circumstances unfolded at that moment. Tell me, Holly, how does you have become such an incredible light to so many? When these extremely tough things happen to people and there's deep, deep suffering like you have gone through, and people can go on a trajectory that's either very destructive or like you have been just really empowered people because of your broken heart. Um, yeah, as a mother, this chokes me up too. um, how did you take those next steps to start healing that broken heart? How did you do that, Holly?
Well, the first thing I guess that happened, and I want to I want to take it back before Danny was killed, to how I came to the understanding, using my own words to him to try and change his mind. I came to realize that I said to him, in trying to change his mind, I said, Danny, this is so hard because I love you so much and I'm afraid. And the moment those words came out of my mouth, I realized I had no choice but to support him because my love is so much greater than any fear. And I told him, I love you so much, I will support you. And so there was a process of getting to know the military and being at all of his graduations and his events, and watching him grow, and watching him mature in a short time. He started he by the time was sworn in, he was 19, and when he was killed, he was only 23. But in those short years, that young man became an amazing man of integrity, so much so that the Vandenberg Air Force Base, just as one example, Vandenberg Air Force Base, where he was stationed, and that's one of the largest of the Air Force bases in the country. It's on the coast in California, 41 miles of coast, where our missiles will be launched if we're ever attacked on our shores, where many of our satellites are launched. And at that time, the only launch pad in the world that launched polar satellites. So, and Danny became an EOD, explosive ordnance disposal technician, or bomb squad to us civilians. So, and that's a really, really tough, it's one of the toughest technical schools in the DOD, the Department of Defense. And the attrition rate is about 75%. And what that looks like is if 500 airmen start, they'll end up with 125 airmen as EOD techs.
Yeah.
And 51% fail out the first phase. So he just flew through that and graduated with honors. And he was so focused, so determined, that he designed training exercises at Vandenberg they still use to this day. And this was 13 and a half years ago that he was killed. And they named the entrance, the main entrance to Vandenberg Air Force Base, they named after Daniel, and put up a big monument with his name saying Senior Airman Daniel J. Johnson Boulevard. Just to kind of let you know what the military did for my son and how he grew, and how he went from this 18-year-old boy to an amazing, confident young man. And so I watched that and supported it, and I was blown away by the military, what they really were, what was happening to him versus what happened to my father.
Yeah.
And when I finally came out of the fog, because I went into, once I got done telling everybody he was missing in action, then I went into a blackout. There's things I have no memory of, no recall for weeks. I mean, and I remember like coming, I don't know how we got to California. I don't remember being greeted. I have nothing. My first memory after that first night, the first solid memory is being in the back seat of a black SUV with two drivers in dress blues in front and driving up to the hotel that we were at 4 months before for his wedding. He died 4 months to the day from his wedding. And that hotel had a big banner. This is what brought me out of my fog the first time. It said, "Our American hero, Senior Airman Daniel J. Johnson." It had his picture. And that snapped me out of my thought first time.
That's beautiful.
And
and tell me too how you have been a beautiful model of love over fear, even love over the fear of the suffering. And as we end our conversation today, tell us, what would you share with other Gold Star families that are going through this and needing to heal from their great loss?
The first thing is to not shy away from that pain. Don't stuff it. Don't run from it. Don't deny it. And don't let anyone convince you need to be better or stronger or different than how you feel in the moment. And if you're going to have people in your life, have people who understand you just need them there with you in that pain. And, one of my biggest mantras, I guess, is that grief is a gift from God. It's a gift that helps us mourn our lost, our profound losses. And when we let ourselves cry, let those tsunamis wash over us and take the time to feel, we will then start feeling a little less of the pain that we're wired to cry for a reason. It's a natural thing. So don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of sadness, of sorrow when you've lost someone so dear in your life. And then what happens is grief starts teaching us lessons. I started seeing, or grief taught me, gratitude on a level I always thought I was a pretty thankful type person. But that was one of my turning points and it was through grief. It was through the tremendous pain coming out of it and realizing there is so much left to be grateful for and
That's
to
beautiful.
experience. And so that has been extremely healing for me, is that, and telling my story and helping other people find their voice and tell their story. And watching that pain lift, that stress, that unattended grief lifts when you find that your voice and talk about it.
You have done a beautiful job in refurbishing your scars and being so generous with your scars, as Scott Mann talks about, who you also work with. Holly, the world needs you, and you are being so generous with your heart. I just want to thank you. I want to just remind everyone, if you want to hear more of Holly's story, she is one of our authors in the book Wounds to Wisdom, Healing Through Veteran and First Responder Narratives. And you can also connect with Holly on LinkedIn, and we'll have all her contact information also. So Holly, thank you again. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your story.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I really appreciate it.